Hi, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Remzi Kulen. I'm an immigration lawyer with over 20 years of experience. I've helped thousands of people relocate to the United States. I was able to get their non-immigrant visas, immigrant visas. And today I'm together with a wonderful employment attorney. His name is Eric Sarver. We met through a networking program and we quickly connected because he has a lot of knowledge about the employment laws. And in the recent months, we've been seeing a lot of interplay between immigration law and employment law. So I thought I would host him in my YouTube channel so that he can have a talk about the employment law issues. And I actually have a few questions for him. Eric, hi, how are you?
Hi, Remzi. I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks again for having me. It's always good to be speaking with you.
No, I know that you've been in YouTube. You have your own YouTube channel, and you've talked about these
Mhm.
issues. And when I saw that you are very familiar with the issues and you're very experienced in them, I thought
Mhm.
maybe this would be a great synergy between an immigration lawyer and an employment lawyer. So let's talk a little bit about yourself. Um, can you give us a rundown? I know you've been doing this for over 25 years, but what can you
Mhm.
tell us about yourself?
Sure. Okay, great, Remzi. Good to touch base. Well, by way of introduction, again, my name is Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney. Employment law is my sweet spot. And a little bit about me, kind of brief background. I started my law firm. It was formerly known as the Law Office of Eric M. Sauver. It's now Sarver Law Firm, PLC. So Sarver Law Firm, we've been at this since April 2001. So next week will be 24 years in practice. Spent 2 years before that in a couple of small firms. And basically, what I focus on is employment litigation, helping business owners to defend against employment lawsuits or charges or claims in court before the Department of Labor, the EEOC. I do compliance, much like you might do Ramsey compliance with immigration. I help companies and businesses to follow, and nonprofits, to follow the federal, state, and city labor and employment laws. And I draft employee handbooks and so forth. And lately I've been counseling clients as well on what to do if ICE comes to raid your office. So there's definitely an overlap and interplay between immigration law in the workplace and employment law and labor law. So last about
Exactly.
me, I'll say is
Let's start
sorry.
with what are some of the employer's responsibilities vis-a-vis its employees? Because we always talk about how
Mhm.
employees are responsible to their employers, but nobody talks about employers' responsibilities to the employees. Can you briefly explain what those would be?
Sure, absolutely. And the last thing I just add about myself quickly is I'm licensed in New York and New Jersey. So I mostly practice in those two states. Right. So, yes, employers' responsibilities to their employees. Well, first off, is an employer has an obligation, right, to follow the various federal, state, and city, in some cases, city, labor and employment laws when it comes to their workers. So, for example, when it comes to wages, right, employers have an obligation to pay all of their employees the minimum wage at least. And there's a federal minimum wage, and there's a much higher, often state to state minimum wage. So that's like one example of an obligation, right? To have the correct and timely pay. Correct pay for overtime, which is time and a half for more than 40 hours a week. So there are a lot of different laws around wages. And these laws, these obligations that the employer has, are not just for your US citizen employees, but for any employees, any workers, including those that are perhaps undocumented, perhaps in a green card or temporary protected class status. So that's one area. Another quick area I can talk about is anti-discrimination statutes, right? These laws require an employer to protect their employees from workplace harassment, workplace discrimination, right? So when it comes to the immigration context, for example, there's a protected class category under the federal law, it's called Title VII, and under certain state laws that says, hey, you can't treat an employee in a discriminatory fashion. You can't be harsher on them. You can't deny them promotions or opportunities simply because of their, let's say, national origin or immigration status, right? If they're,
So
you
let's
know,
let
so that.
let's say somebody's undocumented or out of
Yes.
legal status, and someone is working somewhere. Just
Mhm.
because they don't have a legal status doesn't mean they can get the same protections as green card holders or U.S. citizens. Am I understanding this right?
I'm sorry, your question was if they're not documented, are they entitled to similar protections like for overtime and wages? Yes. And so yeah, actually, yes. The interesting thing about that is that the employer owes, when it comes to, let's say, for example, paying overtime wages, that obligation is as much for, let's say, an undocumented worker as for a U.S. citizen. So I have defended companies from, like, for example, let's say a construction company, right? A lot of construction companies will hire undocumented laborers, day laborers, for days, weeks, months at a time. And they'll sometimes say, oh, well, how can they sue me because they're not, here, they don't have legal status. But the law says that anyone can sue for unpaid overtime wages, right? So the fact that, let's say, the employee's immigration status is in flux or that they're not fully documented, right, doesn't really matter, and that the employer is still liable to them, right? They can still owe them overtime.
And
And
the
same for wages.
and the authorities who are
Mhm.
conducting these investigations or who are deciding on overtime will not take a look at the employee's non-immigrant or immigrant status. Rather, they will look at the employment conditions and decide whether this overtime is due or if there is any harassment. Am I right in saying that? Because the most
Yeah,
important is the work environment.
100% correct. That same holds true for discrimination, sexual harassment, right? Violence in the workplace. And yes, and so that if you're out there listening, if you're, let's say, a worker of, and you're an immigrant and you're not fully documented, it doesn't matter, because if the employer violates your rights, either the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, or the State Department of Labor, New York State, New Jersey, wherever you are, can and will inflict fines and penalties and damages, and the person can still go to court. I've defended cases where we had a class action settlement, and the majority of the workers had an ITIN number because they did not have a social security number, right? Many were not documented, but they still had a case. And you made a point, Ramsey, I want to bring up also, which is that a company can get into really hot water if it tries to threaten their workers. In other words, if the company says to the worker, hey, if you, let's say, Mr. and Mrs. Worker, right, if you go to the authorities, if you go to the Department of Labor, if you go to OSHA for safety violations, if you report us, or if you try to file a lawsuit, they cannot say, we're going to, right, rat you out into the authorities. We're going to tell them that you're undocumented. They can't use that as a defense, and they can't, try to force, let's say, ICE, for example, to go after that person, because that could be a form of retaliation, right? Unlawful retaliation, penalizing a worker for asserting their rights. So I've had clients over the years who had asked that question. Well, the worker's threatening to sue me. What about the fact that they're not fully a U.S. citizen? And I say it doesn't matter. And if you try to punish them and threaten them with that, it can be seen as unlawful coercion and retaliation. So you're 100% right. What matters is the focus of any inquiry is how does the workplace operate, and are these workers protected?
And also, sometimes, for example, sometimes I get calls from my clients saying
Mhm.
immigration is here or Department of Labor is here. Well, the first question is which department from the
Right.
department, what, like which officer from the USCIS? Because there's a lot of different offices under Department of Labor, and they're
Mhm.
not always interested in the legal status of the employees, but rather sometimes maybe the working conditions. So if they are coming from fraud unit from USCIS, for example, they will try to investigate that specific person's, mostly H-1B workers, working conditions. If they're coming from the wage and hour division, they are not going to care about the status of people. They're just going to care about the hours of the workers. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. Um,
Absolutely.
one question that comes to mind in immigration always, and I think one of the most underrated forms of all time is I-9s, where
Yes.
employer gets somebody to work for them. They need to fill out an I-9 form. that shows that that person can work in the US legally. That's also
Hmm.
obligation. It can be audited later. So there's a huge importance placed in the I-9 forms. Uh,
Mm,
can you
sure.
talk about the I-9s a little bit? What are the most important considerations in filling out the I-9s?
Yes, absolutely, Ramsey. This is a really concrete and solid and important topic. So, well, first off, as you mentioned, the I-9, right, is the form that proves, verification that the person applying for the job or the new employee has the legal right, is legally eligible to work in the United States and work for you. So, a couple of things are important, right? The employee fills out what's called Section 1, which has to do with their identity, their eligibility to work. They swear that they're actually, correctly can work in the U.S. Some important things are to make sure that the information is accurate, right? Number one, is the employee providing their full legal name? Are there any other legal names they may have used, like a legal alias, for example? Their date of birth, their citizenship, or immigration status. Are they pending? Are they in a green card? Are they visa? What's their status, right? They need to, the employee have to sign and date the form. And now we have these electronic I-9s, which is a whole other, issue. If the employee, let's say, doesn't speak English as their first language, there may be the need for a certification from a translator, right? Someone that says, hey, the employee used the translator. There's also the issue of non-citizen employees, right? They have to include like their, it's called an A number, like a USCIS number, right? A certain form of admission, or show their foreign passport number. So there's a lot that the employer has to do, and there's a lot that the employee needs to do, and a lot that the employer needs to do. The employer has to like examine documents, right, to make sure that the employee's identity matches up. Their driver's license, for example, their passport. Employers have to keep records of all this, right? Because they could be an ICE raid, there could be an audit, a notice of inspection to serve your I-9. So it's important to keep records. It's important. Last thing I'll say is that employers shouldn't wait. These have to be timely. Like the I-9 needs to be filled out, within 3 business days of the employer's hire date. I've seen companies drop the ball. That restaurants are in a rush to hire. Hey, we had 3 waiters just quit. Quick, hire these folks. And the person says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my I-9. I'll bring it next week. I'll bring it next month." A month goes by. That could be serious penalties, fines, violations. Department of Labor can get involved. ICE can get involved. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So something else that I've seen in the I-9s is, and most
Mm-hmm.
know about it, when you fill out an I-9, you have to include some kind of documentation showing that you can work legally in the United States. And
Right.
there's a whole list, list A, list B, list C. Sometimes I've seen employers ask for a specific document. For example, bring me your US passport or bring me your green.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a problem with that. Can you elaborate
Mm-hmm.
on that?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a problem as well, right? Because you have to be careful about not, let's say, discriminating against employees based on their national origin, where they're from. Number one. Number two, there's all different types of valid ID, right? Besides, let's say, a passport. Besides, let's say, a green card, right? There are lots of different documentation that the employer can request. Some folks might not have a driver's license, right? But they might have some sort of a valid form of ID. I think the key issue, Ramsey, right, is to make sure that the um, the employee is bringing you some proof that they are who they say they are, right? That they're not, let's say, like borrowing their uncle or their brother's identity to come and collect the paycheck and work at your company. But it is very important, to make sure that the information is accurate, it's timely, and it's signed. I've seen companies where they forget to have the employees sign the I-9, right? So, the signature is the important part. That's the certification. That's the part that says, hey, I swear on the penalty of perjury that, the information I gave about myself is true.
And also, for example,
Mm-hmm.
if you're providing documents from that list, and if
Mm-hmm.
the document is okay, it's one of the documents on the list, you cannot go back to the client and ask for something else. As long as the
Correct.
as long as the document makes it to the list, and it's one of those documents, then it should be sufficient. You cannot go and ask for other documentation. And if the document is valid on the face value, if you look at
Mhm.
it deal, then you cannot go and ask for some other documentation, because that again goes against discrimination. I think this is what we tell our clients all the time. I-9s are very
Right.
important in immigration, because that's how we show companies employ people in many visa applications. So
Mhm. True. Very true.
I
Mhm.
wanna uh, I wanna switch the gear a little bit. There is a very
Sure. Yeah.
very famous federally incentivized e-verify program.
Yes.
This is where
Mm.
employers go and verify themselves as employers, and also they hire their employees through this system, so that they don't hire anybody who don't have any work authorization in the United States. We see
Right.
this in the OPT context in immigration law. So
Mhm.
if you have a master's degree or a bachelor degree, if you have an OPT, and if you want to get a 2-year additional OPT, it's called STEM OPT. The company you're going to work for
Yep.
needs to be registered with the E-Verify program. So sometimes clients get a cold feet of registering their
Mhm.
E-Verify program. Is it how do you evaluate the E-Verify program? Is it working? Is it worth it? Is employer in an advantage in doing this, or they are getting into a disadvantage? What is your views on that?
Yeah, it's a good question because a lot of my clients ask this because don't forget, in a lot of states it's not mandatory, right? It's a voluntary program. Some states require it. Let's say they mandate e-verify for their public employees. Other states like Utah might mandate it for private employers that have, let's say, like 50 or more employees. So there's a state to state. There's a list of this different states, Remzi, that will require e-verify. But I'll talk about the pros and cons a little bit, but first, like for those listening today, let's talk about what it is, right? As you mentioned, it is a program, right, where employers can enter information, let's say like for new employees, I-9, for example, the eligibility verification, into this e-verify system. It's like a database, right? And then what I understand to be is e-verify then compares that information against records from where? Records from the Social Security Administration, right? Records from DHS, for example, and then the system can provide like a verification within a matter of seconds. So there are definitely, I think, like some benefits to employers to this, right? I think one is like just e-verify can help employers to assure that they're actually hiring the correct individuals, right? With legal authorization to work in the states. That might in turn lead to a reduction in the risk of penalties, right? Because if you use e-verify and if it can help to increase accuracy of checking an employee's credentials to work here, you cut down on the number of unauthorized workers. The last two things I'll say is that you can have a streamlined process, to integrate all the existing onboarding records with your HR processes, or processes, I should say. And you might want to consult with your HR people about that. And lastly, using e-verify can create a good faith defense, like a presumption of good faith in hiring. So let's say, there's a question of one of your workers' eligibility status, and the government comes after you for a penalty. You're like, listen, I was very careful. I, the employer, voluntarily did the e-verify program. So there's some protection from document fraud. I think like what's important to consider, some cons maybe, is it's not foolproof, right? And it's helpful but not perfect. That can be inaccurate results and information. I think that one con maybe is that it requires a level of training, right, for employers to understand how to use e-verify. Um, and some employers make the mistake of thinking that the e-verify system is a replacement or a substitute for the I-9 form. And to be clear, it's not. I mean, most people use the I-9 information to enter into the e-verify program. But my thoughts are that overall, I think it's a beneficial program for streamlining, for accuracy. I think one concern nowadays in this current climate is we worry about, let's say, right, if ICE is aggressively pursuing, certain people of certain backgrounds, we worry that, well, will this make their job easier? To look up, let's say, um, certain employees that used to have protected class status that don't. So but then again, if they're undocumented, they probably would not have their I-9 and therefore wouldn't be in the E-Verify system. So
Okay, so
yeah.
So E-Verify, that's exactly the question I was going to ask, and you answered it already. E-Verify does not
Yeah,
replace the I-9 form. Let's
correct.
say we made a mistake on the I-9 form. We didn't fill it out on time.
Mhm.
The information was incorrect. Is there a way to fix it afterwards?
There is, right? It's a great question, Ramsey. Indeed, there is. You can actually write and have a corrected or amended I-9 form. Let's say, right, you have the wrong information. There's a spelling error in the name. As long as it's done in a timely fashion, right? As soon as the mistake is discovered, and that corrected I-9 is filed, kept on file, and reported, with the proper, right, governmental authorities, and the mistake is explained. It could be in a written statement. It could be that, there was a data entry error, entering the person's last name, or let's say, right, the person's country of origin. There was a mix-up, so it can be corrected, and it's important to know because I think a lot of employers are afraid. They're scared of penalties, fines, and consequences for admitting a mistake. They want to try to cover it up. Oh no, we made a mistake. Let's just bury it. But then if they get audited, if there's an I-9 audit or inspection and documents do not add up, the government can say, how come you didn't correct this when you learned about the mistake?
Okay. Um, I know, Eric, that you handle the employer's side of the business, right? The
Yes.
employment lawyer on the employer side. That's how it works. Employment lawyer can be employer side or it can be employee side. And some
Mhm.
attorneys maybe do both sides. I don't know, but I didn't see that a lot. I mean, it's
Actually, I do about maybe like a little bit of the employee side, but in limited capacity. Between 15 and 20% of my clients are employees negotiating hand severance or
well, great.
reviewing their contracts.
That's great because this is the question I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what are some of the considerations for employees? What would you recommend employees do? What do you see as problems in the arising conflicts, and how can the employees make it better?
It's a great question because you're right. The majority of my work is for employers, small business, nonprofits, SMBs, medium businesses in all fields. But for the employees, what can we do to make it better? Okay, well, I think the first thing they can do is to make sure that if they have a visa, if they're here in a visa program, that all their documents and paperwork are in alignment, are consistent and timely and accurate. Number one, I think right. Number two is right that if an employee, let's say, feels that they are either being mistreated in an unlawful fashion. For example, if they feel that they're not getting paid proper overtime, or they feel that they're being discriminated against, they're being harassed at the job because they're Muslim, because they're, let's say, Mexican or Turkish or whatever the case may be, or Arabic, right? That they actually have a right to speak up, against that unlawful behavior with the proper authorities, which can be the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It could be the New York State Department of Labor for wages and overtime. So my advice is to get your documentation in order, and then number two, to report any concerns you have first internally. To give the company a chance to self-correct. But
Mhm.
if you are being taken advantage of, um, you need not be intimidated that I have no rights to. Like I've heard employees say, I didn't think I had any rights because I'm not documented, so my employer doesn't pay minimum wage. I have to just take it, and that's not the case at all.
And do you first go to you have to try to correct it with the company first, yes? And then do you go to an agency or do you go to do you go to a lawyer? Because this could be very complicated. Would it be better to go to
Yes.
an attorney first?
So I always recommend going to the employment lawyer first, even before going internally to your company. I'll tell you why. What that lawyer, like for example myself, could help you to know what to say and what not to say to your employer. Should you be recording the conversation? Are you allowed to, based on the state you're in? If it's a phone call versus in person, are there any, for example, policies against recording in the workplace? What should you reveal or not reveal? Right? So I think the first step, step one, is even before you bring it up with the employer, is to go to the lawyer. I've heard people say, first go to your employer and talk to them if you think you're being discriminated against, and then find an employment lawyer. And the problem there is, again, I've had clients, that employees that went to the company and said, hey, you discriminated against me, and I can prove it because I have a copy of a succession plan, and I took it home with me, and I'm going to, take it to court if I have to. It shows a discriminatory pattern. Well, you may have just admitted that you misappropriated a confidential document, right? And they say, aha, that's a fireable offense, and they terminate you for that reason. So I might tell that person, hey, don't don't use that. Use some other information, right? So step one is go to the employment lawyer. And then the employment lawyer, for example, like myself, can talk to you and we can ascertain what's the next step to. So often step two is go to the company, go to HR, go to the manager, because you want to try to resolve internally. But there are times when that's not an option. If the person, let's say, for example, sexually harassing you as a female employee is the CEO, and president of the company, I'm not sure what good it might do to go to HR, right? Because they're afraid of the CEO. So you might have to go straight to the EOC or straight to court. So it's like usually you go to the company, and
Go
that's
to
another
the,
thing that,
go to the employment attorney first, basically.
right? We can help you ascertain. You know what? I think you better go to HR on this. Oh, it sounds like HR is in the back pocket of the company, or somebody from HR. I'm on a case one for somebody from HR was the harasser, right? So going to HR to allege discrimination when the discriminating person was the HR manager, I said, you know what? We have to just write a letter to legal counsel and tell them, hey, listen, we're going to go to court unless you resolve this.
Okay. So I think this is my last question. And
Sure.
I want to ask this because I know most employment law issues arise because
Mhm.
of employees complaining about their employers, I think. So, what would your
Yes.
advice to the employers?
Hmm.
Sure, they are in compliance. How do they know if they're in compliance? If they don't know what they can do, and also what should they be careful about, not to face with these kinds of claims?
Yes. Excellent two questions, right? And my answer is similar to the answer I gave for employees, which is, step one is to get with an employment lawyer to make sure that you're aware of, you have knowledge of, and that you understand your obligations as an employer under federal law and state laws, municipal laws, right? When it comes to issues of hiring and firing, when it comes to salary transparency, for example, or right, what questions you can and can't ask in an interview or a job posting, or what's the overtime rate, what's the prevailing wage when it comes to, let's say, hiring people from afar. So my first step is to make sure that you talk to your employment lawyer to get into compliance. Like I do compliance, and we can help you to like follow and implement the law. Step two is make sure that you read FAQs, frequently asked questions, on the Department of Labor's website or the EOC. That might give you some main pointers about what overtime laws are required. When do you pay overtime, when not. Then lastly, make sure you get an HR, either a fractional HR person, someone you hire as needed, or in-house HR, because it's impossible to keep track of all these laws like as a layperson, in my opinion. I mean, there are just so many laws. If you're a remote workforce, you have people being hired in 12 states. Now you've got 12 state laws around. Do you have non-competes or not have non-compete agreements? Are they legal? Are they illegal? Is there a minimum salary threshold? So short answer is like, try to read up. But again, Google is not a replacement for your employment lawyer, right? Because laws are always changing. There are new laws being introduced. And I think that having compliance on your side is a very empowering position, helps you to reduce the risk of getting in trouble by employees or by government agencies for breaking the law.
Exactly. That's great. Great advice. Um,
Mhm.
I think this was great. I just wanna let viewers know as to what kind of cases you can take and how they reach you.
Sure.
You said you were admitted in New York and New Jersey. So employment law is usually a state law, right? There are some things that can go to federal court, but usually it's by state. Am I right? So if you're licensed in New York and New Jersey, that's where you do most of your work. Is that a correct understanding?
Correct when it comes to litigation, when it comes to, let's say, the selling of commercial property. There are some things I can do for other employees in other states, if it's, for example, advising, compliance, investigations, as long as I'm doing the work from my office in New York City or my office in New Jersey, and as long as there's a nexus of business in that state. But when it comes to litigation or say Department of Labor, you're correct. Yeah, I need to be in New York, in New Jersey. So anyone watching, if you own a small business, it could be a mechanic shop, pizzeria, could be an advertising agency, or it could be an architecture firm. I've had puppeteers as clients, puppeteer companies. I've had accounting firms. I've had dentist office. But yeah, so definitely in those states, it's pretty key. But I could help a company in Texas if it's a question of, hey, can you revise our employee handbook?
Yes.
Hey, can you help us understand the New York law for our New York employees?
Okay, wonderful. Eric, this is
Mhm.
great. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure there are some questions that I didn't ask. Our viewers may wonder. So, if you have questions about employment law that you would like to ask Eric, please write them down on the comment section below. Uh,
Mhm.
we will try to review them, and we will respond to the comments. If I don't know the answer, I'll ask Eric to I'll ask Eric to respond to
Mhm.
it.
Sure.
Please follow our channel. On the background, you can see my English YouTube channel. And we are uploading videos as we speak. It's been just a few months. I've been in
Mhm.
social media for the last 5 years, but my YouTube channel on the English version has just been established. So we are very excited about it. We also have an Instagram account, and I'm sure Eric has a YouTube video, has YouTube videos and a YouTube channel. We will put that on the description as well. Eric, thank you so much for being a guest on my YouTube channel.
Remzi, quickly, two things. One, thank you first and foremost for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your well thought out, very just on point questions. And then secondly, that if people need more information, want to speak to me directly, I can give my website because that's a very quick link and it has my email address, it has my firm's phone number, all that's my address. So it's www Sarver, S like in Sam, AR, V is in Victor, ER, my last name, hyphen, law, LAW.com. So, if they go to that site, they can find out more about me or Google me, and I'm happy to help wherever I can. Thank you once again for having me. It's great talking
Thank you
with you.
so much.
You're
Um,
welcome.
we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.